to another episode and to another week of Justification. Thank you for tuning in, and especially in this new year. So, before we begin, may this new year bring you the hearing and the answering of your prayers, bring you closer to your faith and to the body of your faith in a very real and lively fashion, and bring you closer and nearer to the character of the living God in order to strengthen your character, both personally and devotionally. But picking up for where we last left off, the issue of landmarks, which is a very sensitive issue, because it has to do with the challenging of structural belief, where we have given our trust, where we have given our time, where we have surrendered or submitted our spiritual intelligence to. It is not so easy refraining from that beginning, and not even necessarily refraining from maybe even looking at from a different perspective. And this is what the Bible's calling us for to do. The Bible's calling us to look at from a different perspective where our original faith is coming from. And so while the Bible is saying do not erase the landmarks, at the same time the Bible is saying erase the landmarks, but not the landmark that is within clear sight. Should we, sort of step aside from the landmark that we have inherited or we have willingly cultivated. And this is a bit of the issue that we touched on last meeting, which harped on the book of John chapter 12, 24 and 25. John chapter 12, 24 and 25, which reads, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." Verse 25, "He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal." And this is interesting, because when we're talking about life, right? The last meeting we were together, we spoke about this life. Is it real? Is the life that's spoken about real? Are we to actually love our life? Are we to actually hate our physical life? Loving the physical life, hating the physical life. Is this actually real? Is there a call for actual suicide? Is the Bible calling us to actually commit suicide? Is suicide a sign of devotion, the ultimate sign of devotion, physical? Because that's what it sounds like if we're going to read it that way. And the answer is no. There is a suicide that is supposed to be not natural, but that is supposed to occur within. The life, we last learned, is not a physical, natural, literal life. The life is, in turn, a designation for the conversation, the devotional conversation. Our faith, our confidence, our hope, our intellect to the living God, and how we live out that. This is what is called life. Our devotional conversation is the life, quote unquote life, within the Bible. 1 Timothy 4:12 again, 1 Timothy 4:12. May have touched on this the last time, may not have. Just an example of that definition of life and its connotation. "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." And so last time we met, we associated this word life, conversation, via context. And it's through context that we understand its definition, because we will never find anything blatant. The Bible's not written that way. The Bible's written in a sort of structure, Hebrew parallelism, to where the definition is found through sentences and through structures before and after of what we're reading. And so the context of this word life, it is found in the context of conversation. It is found in the context of faith. It is found in the context of how the faith is carried by the individual. This is our life. This is the life that we are to lose. We are to lose how we carry our devotional conversation. And we're to lose this conversation because it is a conversation, quote unquote, in the world. In the world. So now, if the life that we have is not physical, must we believe that the world is physical? The world in reference within the Bible is not the natural world. If the suicide, if the losing of the life that the Bible is calling for is not a natural, physical, literal life, the world that this killing is called for is not a natural, literal, or physical world. And we can prove this. And all of this fits into what we are going for, which is the understanding of the practical application of this term called justification. Justification. What is it? Why is it? How is it? And when is it? So we're touching on all of these things, piece by piece, to build up to a larger fragment that we can put together and see a portrait. This world, how do we define this world? In the book of John, chapter 18, verse 20, this is just, for the sake of time, one example. And it's a pretty blatant example. Defining the term word. John chapter 18 and verse 20. John chapter 18 and verse 20 says, Jesus answered him, I spake openly to what? Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. How is the world defined? What was spoken openly to? Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. The world that the Bible is mentioning, the world that our life is to be hated, is in reference not to the literal, natural abiding, physical world, but to the world where the Jews resort, but to the world of the religious temple. This is not a literal physical world. This is a religious world. Our life is to die to the religious world. What the actual man was teaching, in all simplicity, was that in order to have a more full devotional conversation with the living God, with your Creator, you have to let go of your temporal belief that is associated with your temporal religious denomination. The temporal philosophy associated with your spirituality must die in order for you to move on into a higher state of mind and understanding and of feeling and of thought and of acting and of behaving and of doing. The belief that you have that is connected to this world, the conversation that you have that is connected to your formal traditional religion, it is preventing you from knowing the actual context of the living God's character. Blasphemous, right? Completely blasphemous. It's so blasphemous that the man was crucified for teaching this. Because you can't walk around saying that the tradition of old, that the landmark of old, is preventing the actual discovery of the deity it is supposed to be representing. That makes no sense. It makes no sense to discard what was of old in order to get to something that may or may not be, because there is an unknown way to understand what you're trying to get us to acknowledge without the landmarks. Without the landmarks, God does not exist. Simple. And this is why the man was crucified. He was walking around telling individuals that your tradition was keeping you from understanding the living God's context. Your tradition was actually crucifying the living God. And so in order to cease that crucifixion from happening, in order to alleviate the tension between your mind and the mind within the words of scriptures, of these scriptures, there has to be a killing. There has to be a separation. You have to die to your world. You have to die to this world being specific, meaning this religious world and the context and the philosophy that is within it. Your devotional conversation cannot exist within it, because if it will not know the living God. And so we have a real decision to make. It comes down to us willingly or being able to separate from, because we put so much confidence on the opinions that we hear from mother and from father, from theologian, from philosopher, from pastor. We know more quotes from Pastor so-and-so than from in the Bible. And so once these things get so intertwined with our character, and when that happens, it becomes emotional. And when it becomes emotional, it's not about sense anymore. It's about the credibility we have in these characters, while we should be having the credibility in ourselves. And this is what the Bible is saying. The Bible is saying that there has to be a point where you reach to make your experience real. There comes a point in time where you have to make your experience real, where you have to breathe on your own. You're no longer within the womb. You have to be born and take the first breath. That's the first thing. That's the first challenge, I would say. A newborn has to do that. That's pretty difficult. That first breath outside of the womb. That explains the shrieks of that little child, because it's breathing on its own now and it absolutely sucks. But that's what we have to put ourselves, and not physical self, what we have to put the self of our devotional conversation through. There has to be, at some point in time, we have to understand that what we're hearing is never going to amount to what we need. We're continuing to lend ourselves to these to voices, various voices, and let them be what they may. Let them be what they may. But at the end of the day, we have to lay down with the voices in our own head. At the end of the day, we have to walk with no one beside us except our faith. And where to our faith is envisioning, and to what we envision to be beside us as we walk. And so the challenge is that this life, this world, they have to take a very strange yet positive turn to where we're no longer taking life support from the religious world, but we're getting our life support from the words within the Bible. And that means from the experience that we are getting from practically applying them. So when the living God's chief apostle lived and spoke this, it was utterly confusing, because you cannot, and it was the fulfilling of what Moses said. Moses said that he would speak the living God's words, and he is. And he is. He's articulating the concept or the philosophy of growth that is it's really not foreign. It is the original landmark. It is the original landmark, but it is not known because a landmark has come and hindered it from being seen. So when this individual is saying about the life and separating or hating it, or in losing it, lose this life within this world, within the context of the theological framework that you know your beliefs to be structured around, you need to lose that. You lose that, and you will gain something far greater. You will gain an experience, you will gain a character, you will gain a person, you will gain industry, you will gain a love for yourself and for life and for other minds and for being and for other beings greater than ever before. And so when he spoke in the book of Luke 14, 26 and 27, when he spoke and said, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yeah, and what? What is that? And wife and children and brethren and sisters, yeah, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Whosoever, in verse 27, does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And it's not the actual literal disciple, because there is no physical individual that we can say we will go and be the disciple of. One is only the disciple via the philosophy that is given. So should we not be able to do what this individual is asking for? The philosophy that he's giving will not benefit us. And the benefit is liberty. Liberty to be. Liberty to be. this liberty to be, it goes back to our very first episode when we spoke about the definition of justification. Associated with this term justification is liberty. And so now we're getting a greater sense of what the liberty within this term justification from the Hebrew and Greek sense means. Liberty from what? The answer is liberty from the life in this world. Liberty from the life in this world. And then we understand the second part of that, because when we also spoke about that definition of justification, it was associated with chastening, with judgment. And so this chastening, this judgment for liberty, it is a liberty of chastening that we have to put our devotional conversation through in order to have a mind that is able to perceive the experience that the living God is calling for. This experience where this quote-unquote world is not regulating how we behave and act spiritually or devotionally. We should be acting or behaving from the knowledge of our faith. We should be acting and behaving according to our individual normally, via the experience we have through the exercising of our faith in the words that we have taken in and applied. In this sense, our conversation, stepping away from what we formerly took to be a lively devotional habit, is receiving life through the wisdom that comes from experience. Speaking to a friend of mine, when was it? Thursday. Speaking to a friend of mine Thursday, and he's going through a lot and has been through a lot, but is now turning his life in a completely different direction. He's owing it to God. And he's saying that when I went through and experienced myself not picking up the habits that I used to use, when I went through and I experienced not embracing that habit that I needed, and then when I substituted that habit with something more healthy, because this is he's saying, because I need something. So now instead of that, I'm going to water. Instead of this, I'm going to water. So when I substitute this for that, and I'm seeing clarity, I'm seeing the new ambitions. My brain is functioning better, and I'm able to know myself. And this conversation, and when he's saying this, he's saying I'm able to know myself. And it's from the experience of going through that substitution and making that substitution and going through that act, taking the steps to go through that act and feeling it. It is God. And this is what he's telling me. And so in the context of what we're talking about, the Bible's letting us know that, and not even the Bible, the living God's chief apostle is letting us know that we have a habit. Our habit is lending our faith to quote-unquote experts. Lending our faith to landmarks, which for a time, let it be what it will. This is what is needed in order to get us to where we need to be. But there comes a point in time where the life you're giving to the landmark, it has to be cut off from the landmark in order to see the living God's landmark. That landmark is stopping us, or is preventing us, the landmark that we have inherited or that we have willingly fallen into, is stopping us from, it's limiting our experience in what the living God would have us on a daily basis know for real. So above lending our thoughts and our feelings to what is ritualized, above lending our thoughts and feelings to what is theorized, so now the experience can become us, and we can fall into developing our own wisdom to test and to prove and to repeat until we have proven just what that will of the living God is. And everything I'm saying, it is absolutely not foreign to what is in the Bible. And I can prove it because in the book of Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2 begins, and be not conformed to what? Be not conformed to this world. So now, the beauty within the Bible is now, when you understand the context of its language, you can apply it to where it's necessary. So now we understand what Paul is saying here. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So like in one verse, Paul has just summed up what I've said in like 6 episodes. It's ridiculous. But this is fact. And it is fact because the philosophy that Paul and the living God's chief apostle and that is within the Bible that is getting at, it's getting at is that there is a conflict of interest. This religious world, it is decent for the time when we're innocent in what we're innocent in, but we're not to be conformed to it. We're not to be fallen into it. We are not to go into it. We are not to become comfortable into it, because it is not as real as we would assume it is. It is based on a landmark structure through theories and philosophies that have honestly nothing to do with what is within the Bible. And it is comforting. It is comforting only to our lower nature, to still us, not according to pure thought, but rather according to conscience, in that it makes us believe by a conscience that we are doing right. So the routines and the practices of this world, sure, be in, but not of. But the context remains the same when we're applying it to the Bible. The Bible is not a natural book. This is not a naturally structured book. When entered into the Bible, we're not reading a literal history book. We are reading a form of writing that, yes, there is history in it, but the history that is within it, it is all written metaphorically. It is all written allegorically. There is an analogy within what is written in every single one of these chapters. The structure of the Bible is not as literal as we may take. Dig underneath for the meaning of that metaphor, and then the reality hits. The world that our devotional conversation is not to be conformed to is the one that we have willingly walked into and given credibility to, because it is where we were led to innocently. Again, let that be what it may. But there comes a time and point where our faith must get born. And the longer we remain within, quote unquote, the world, we will remain unborn and suffering as fetuses. Not we literally, we as in our faith, in the body of our intellect when it comes to matters that are within the Bible, which are matters that relate to our human being. So there's a trickle-down effect. The longer we remain unborn is the longer that our natural self remains carnal. Carnal and, not necessarily wild, however we may interpret that to be, but carnal in the sense of not feeling for self and for other minds. And so when it comes to the second part of that verse, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is the mind of your devotion. There is a practical renewal that is supposed to happen. And this is what we've been talking about, not blatantly. We will get to there blatantly. But the transformation of our devotional conversation's conscience is the point of justification. It is the point of the Bible taking us through a route that we do not know. It is the point of us taking our faith and exercising it on the words within the Bible. The renewing of our mind by what we discover through experiencing is what will allow us to know the living God better. And so, for me, the decision isn't really that difficult. Understanding that there is a lot that goes into life, and even though I'm, young, haven't really experienced the life to the point of someone older than me, what I have learned thus far is that being real with self and allowing self to be real with itself is the highlight and should forever be the highlight of our existence. The Bible is pointing us into this direction, not in any other fashion as you would go into another practice, but via the correction or via the renewal of our devotional conscience. Not erasing what we know, not erasing the landmark, but allowing our experience to correct or to better the landmark that has been established, to see the original landmark that the living God has set, is what will allow us to be better human beings and devotional beings. In a real sense, it is completely holistic, because our experience allows us to fall into the elements that are surrounding us in a very real way, to where we can now feel them by feeling what the words within the Bible are saying or are hinting at. And not only so, because once we get through this experience, once we're continuing in this experience, we will begin to learn the doctrine, the philosophy, or the law that is within the Bible. The primary commandment, philosophy, law that is within the Bible. We will begin to learn it through this experience. And this points me to our final verse in the book of Psalms 119. Psalms 119 verse 165. Psalms 119 verse 165 says, "Great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them." You recount episodes before or meetings prior, we spoke about peace. And there is peace, genuine peace, that comes from knowing the living God's law. Not talking about the law in a connection to Moses or to the Jews or to any sort of theological anything. We're talking about the law or the philosophy within the Bible. This is our peace as human beings, and the experience is what gives it.